On the day Jack died, Dr Bawagaba was doing the job of 4 doctors. She was covering 6 wards across 4 floors, while supervising 2 junior doctors new to paediatrics. She'd only just returned from 14 months maternity leave, and she did this without a consultant who should have been on site.
Today, new passenger analysis was released. Just 23% have trust in rail firms. Fewer than half of passengers see fares as value for money, and falling even lower for regular commuters, with less than a third seeing prices as justified.
This matters because Labour's already under fire for not adopting the full International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance definition of anti-Semitism. They've left out one of its examples, denying the Jewish people their right to self-determination by claiming that the existence of a state of Israel is a racist endeavour.
When the coalition government came to power in 2010, the number of rough sleepers in England was 1,768. But it's gone up substantially every year since. By 2016 it was more than 4,000, and the latest figures have nearly 5,000 men and women sleeping on the streets.
2 ticketing websites are to be shut down because of complaints about inflated prices for popular events. It's claimed touts exploit so-called secondary resale sites to rake in huge profits. Ticketmaster says its resale sites, Seatwave and Get Me In, will close later this year. Well, Chloe Keedy is here. So, Chloe, does this actually mean an end, then, to these sites?
Well, the short answer to that is no. Yes, 2 of the sort of big beasts of the secondary ticketing world have in effect gone, but they're not the biggest. In fact, they make up maybe only 10 to 15% of the market overall. So, as I think we can see here, up until now, there have been 4 main resale sites: Viagogo, StubHub, Seatwave and Get Me In. Now, today's announcement concerns these 2, Get Me In and Seatwave, and they'll be shut down from October. In place of them, fans will be allowed to sell tickets directly on Ticketmaster, who have launched their own new, what they're calling a ticket exchange. Now, the good news for fans is that tickets have to be bought and sold on here at face value. But the bad news is that Ticketmaster are going to stick a 15% fee on every ticket bought. So why have they done this? Well, Ticketmaster will tell you it's because they've listened to fans and their frustrations about the market. But a bit of background here: Viagogo is under investigation by trading standards, and all 4 sites are under investigation by the Competition and Markets Authority. So it's a pretty toxic atmosphere, and that may have had something to do with Ticketmaster's decision to get out.
Chloe, thank you.
There are 4 main resale sites: Viagogo, StubHub, Seatwave and Get Me In. Viagogo is currently under investigation by National Trading Standards for misleading customers. Today's announcement concerns these 2, which will officially be shut down from October. Instead, fans will be able to resell tickets directly through the Ticketmaster site, but it must be at the original price.
The crisis has sent the lira into a nosedive. It has lost over a quarter of its value against the dollar since the beginning of the month. It's also hit the Istanbul stock market, which has lost a fifth of its value in less than a week.
This morning's attack happened at 7:37 during the busy rush hour. The silver Ford Fiesta was travelling west along Abingdon Street when it sharply swerved left into oncoming traffic, crashing into several cyclists. The driver then sped up, crossing into this slip road before crashing into the security barrier outside the House of Lords. It was only a few hundred metres from last year's terror attack when 5 people, including a police officer, were killed.
Now, a disaster of huge proportions is unfolding in Italy, where a motorway flyover in one of its major cities collapsed during a storm. At least 30 people were killed as vehicles plunged 100 metres off the bridge in Genoa and buildings below were crushed. The Morandi Bridge was built in the 1960s and carries a 4-lane motorway. It runs through an industrial area between the districts of Cornigliani and Sampierdarena. An 80-metre section of the bridge crashed down onto railway tracks, a warehouse and into a flooded creek below. Juliet Brenner reports. Well, now, another blow for the retail parks that once thrived on the outskirts of many towns and cities. The DIY chain Homebase has announced sweeping closures. 42 of its stores are going to shut, putting around 1,500 jobs at risk. And our reporter Joanna Partridge joins me now. So what is behind these closures then?
Well, Mary, it'll be a worrying time for staff at the 241 Homebase stores across the UK, but not entirely a surprise. Closures and a restructuring plan have been expected from the chain's new owners, Hilco, turnaround specialist, which bought the chain for just £1 earlier this year. The company's announced today that it intends to close 42 more stores, and that's going to put 1,500 jobs under threat. I also understand that the company's seeking rent reductions at a further 70 stores. Of course, landlords and other creditors will get to have their say on that in a vote later this month. Some of the reasons that Homebase is in trouble: its share of the DIY market has fallen from 6.9% in 2015 to just 4.8% of the market now. There is, of course, lots of competition in retail at the moment. Some of Homebase's problems were self-inflicted with a failed strategy from its former Australian owners, Wesfarmers, who wanted to turn the stores into warehouses. But also, younger generations are increasingly renting property rather than owning it, and that makes them much less likely to spend money on DIY and home improvement.
All right, Joanna, thank you very much.
Over the last 10 years, fares have gone up around 40%. Now they could rise again, up to another 3.2% from January, enraging many. If season ticket fares go up the full 3.2%, some would rise over £100. Liverpool to Manchester, up by £101 annually. Gloucester to Birmingham, a rise of £131. And Brighton to London, up £150.
RPI is usually higher, so you get higher fare rises, but many people say it's out of date, and even the Bank of England's boss says it serves no merit. So you could switch to the more modern CPI, lower, so lower fare rises. But someone else is going to have to pick up the economic strain. That'll either impact rail workers' wages, rail investment, or rail companies' profits.
Good evening. Sometimes you can be blindsided in life by the strangest things. Certainly motorists crossing a high-level motorway bridge in Genoa this morning could not possibly have known that it had some kind of structural defect big enough to send it crashing to earth, taking many of them with it. In all, between 30 and 35 cars and 3 heavy lorries. 22 bodies have been found so far, though miraculously some people did actually survive the plunge downwards. It happened in the industrial city of Genoa in the north of the country, where the major A10 motorway runs along a stretch of carriageway 50 metres off the ground. A section some 80 metres long, busy with cars and with lorries, collapsed onto the buildings below, among them 2 warehouses, mercifully closed and empty for the summer holiday.
Investigators will be drawn to some key areas. The first are these structures, the bridge's stay cables. On nearly all modern bridges, they're exposed steel, but in Genoa, they were concealed in concrete. That meant corrosion couldn't be seen. Major repairs to strengthen the decaying stays were carried out on just this section of the bridge in the 1990s. It survived. The second area of interest will be the now collapsed tower. It too could have had corrosion concealed in concrete. And then there's the roadway itself. It had undergone nearly constant repair since the 1970s after it began to bend and twist.
So more jobs sadly at risk at Homebase, and yet unemployment continues to fall. In April and May and June this year, the rate averaged 4%. There was a fall of 65,000 to 1.36 million. And that is the lowest figure since 1975.
And finally, a British man has broken the world record for the longest ever sea swim, even though he's only halfway to his target. Ross Edgley set out from Margate at the beginning of June to swim round the British mainland, a matter of a mere 2,000 miles. Well, now, after a record 74 days at sea along the Channel and up past Wales, he's off Scotland's west coast, from where Peter Smith reports. Well, our science editor Tom Clark is here. Tom, do you think it's going to turn out to be a combination of faults?
As often in these things, it may well do. I mean, what seems to be emerging is that the Morandi Bridge was notorious amongst engineers in Italy for its almost constant need for maintenance. And there's a few key elements of its design which I think investigators will be looking at. Let's take a look at this section of the bridge that collapsed. First, there are these stay cables. They held up the roadway. They're steel, but very unusually for this type of bridge, they're surrounded in concrete. In the 1990s, it was found that concrete had concealed serious corrosion in some of the cables. They were repaired, but the rest of them, including, importantly, on the section that collapsed, plans to repair those were only drawn up at the beginning of this year. Then there's the towers of the bridge itself. Now, those also include cables surrounding concrete, again, that could have masked corrosion. There's also the possibility that heavy rain or high winds could have undermined foundations or pushed the bridge. That has happened in other bridge collapses. And then there's the roadway itself, subject to ongoing repairs since the 1970s. I think the picture that's emerging, and I think what will be concluded is, was the maintenance programme for this bridge up to scratch? Was enough money being spent? Was it monitored correctly? Difficult questions for Autostrada. That's the company in Italy that manages their roadways.
Yeah, indeed. Tom, thank you very much.
And her famous friends rallied round. Former President Bill Clinton tweeting, "Like people around the world, Hillary and I are thinking about Aretha Franklin tonight and listening to her music that has been such an important part of our lives the last 50 years. From the Reverend Al Sharpton, a simple message. Pray for the Queen, Aretha Franklin, a true warrior and my dear friend."
Confirming precisely what stage this case is at. In it, they say that in total 31 people, as you say, 30 men and 1 woman, have been charged with offences including rape and trafficking. The alleged offence is said to have been committed between 2005 and 2012. They said there were 5 alleged victims, all girls who were aged between 12 and 18 at the time. Of course, this isn't the first such inquiry of this nature in this part of the world.
A States of Jersey police spokesman said this afternoon 30-year-old Daniel Cipriani was charged with common assault, larceny, assault on police, resisting arrest and disorderly on licensed premises. He's been remanded in custody until his court appearance at the Magistrates' Court at 10 a.m. tomorrow.
When we report on issues that affect thousands of people, like mental health treatment, for example, many of the challenges or breakthroughs are common throughout the UK, of course, but there are understandably individual differences in different parts of it. That is something we are highlighting over the next 3 nights, starting with the pressures on provision in Wales. The number of NHS beds available for Welsh patients with mental illness has fallen by a quarter, from more than 2,000 in 2010 to 1,552 last year. The Welsh Government says that's because it's delivering more community care. And all the while, the number of people in Wales waiting for mental health treatment has doubled in 7 years, from 916 in May 2011 to more than 1,800 this year. That can mean inevitably, in some cases, having to travel long distances for help.
Here's what we know about Salih Khatir. He's 29 years old, born in Sudan. He came to Britain in 2010 as a refugee and was granted asylum and eventually citizenship. He lives in the Sparkbrook area of Birmingham, and he briefly studied at Coventry University but dropped out in May. He was not known to the security services or to counter-terrorism police.
Now, who would honestly want to be Transport Secretary when train timetables have been all over the place with delays, cancellations and overcrowding? On top of all that, a clear signal today that tickets could go up by more than 3%. So how would Chris Grayling respond to some robust questioning by our consumer editor, Chris Choi? Well, first, some background. Today, July's RPI measure of inflation was revealed to be 3.2%. So regulated fares in England and Wales could rise by up to that amount in January, pushing up annual season ticket costs, even on routes hit hard by massive delays and cancellations only recently. For example, despite a disastrous timetable change, Northern will charge £91 more to travel from Manchester to Preston. Overall, rail fares have risen 41% in the last decade, while the average salary has grown by only 18%. The squeeze on passengers is very real. So would Mr Grayling request a fare freeze and win back a bit of passenger sympathy? No.
Mental health services for children in Scotland are overwhelmed and under-resourced. 1 in 5 young people referred by their GP for mental health treatment are being rejected.
Welcome back. Campaigners are telling ITV News that mental health care in Northern Ireland is in danger of becoming the province's forgotten service. They say Northern Ireland has the biggest incidence of mental ill health in the UK, but the smallest budget for tackling it. For example, the suicide rate in Northern Ireland is 16.4 per 100,000 population compared to 10.3 in England. But Northern Ireland spends half what England does on mental health, 6% of its health budget, as opposed to 12% in England. For the latest in our series on the state of mental health care, Emily Morgan reports from Northern Ireland.
Is there life on Mars?
Kerala is the worst affected of the 7 states in India hit by monsoon floods this year. 220,000 people have already taken shelter in 1,500 state-run camps. With more than 6,000 miles of road destroyed, 18 aircraft and 400 boats have been deployed to bring people to safety.
They're some of the country's best-known fashion brands. Among the almost 2,000 companies, large and small, left out of pocket when House of Fraser collapsed into administration a week ago, some by millions of pounds. The supplier with the biggest black hole, XPO Logistics, owed over £30 million. They run the 2 online warehouses, and with no orders being processed, House of Fraser's pulled the plug on its website.